Hello, friends. I am Barbie Ladeveze, founder of Strategic Uncoupling and best-selling author of Divorce in the World of Family Law. If you love history, this is the place to get snippets of my friend's marvelous journey from how New York's Wall Street originated to Norway, to emperors, even down to ballroom dance of the foxtrot. It is sprinkled with dashes of genealogy, loss of a teenager, conflict in marriage, and honor. Her life in Denmark as a child away from her parents during a war, her pioneering work, and so much more. Her amazing legacy is awe-inspiring, and she's fun and sassy, and tuning in will give you a sense of inspiration to live life with gusto, have unshakable faith, and be unwavering in character. Her remarkable ability to recall and articulate those moments that she shared with me are so inspiring. It is a privilege and honor to sit with Norma. She is not only sassy, but an amazing, resilient soul that's nearing 93 years young. She has 5 children, 16 grandchildren, and 32 great-grandchildren, with more on the way. Today, she is widowed and is just lovely. I wanted to share this video with you, mostly to show that you are never alone in your journey, and to highlight that with your unshakable faith and determination, forgiveness, and the much needed love, that you will manage to prevail and sail off into the sunset. It is with great pleasure today I introduce you to my very sweet friend, Norma Petersen. So Norma, I think you're an amazing soul with a rich background. It's something that is just, I'm in awe of you. And your lifelong history is amazing, and I thought it would be a great opportunity for not only you to see this, but also your family and your grandchildren. I would love, with your permission, to be able to share it with my private community.
Yes.
So they can get some insight as to your beautiful journey, see the highs and the lows, and how you were able to overcome all of these obstacles that you shared with me previously. I thought we would share a little bit about your background, specifically, like, where are your parents from?
My parents are from Denmark. My dad is from Copenhagen, and my mother is on a little island where Hans Christian Andersen is from.
Yeah.
And she's from a village on the top of that island.
Amazing. And how do you know the story of how they met?
Yes. They didn't meet in Denmark. My dad ended up sailing in the Pacific, I think it was, the Danish freighter. And the cook was gay, and he was threatening a Norwegian young man and my dad. And so they decided to jump ship in Coos Bay up in California. And so they did. And they became hobos on the train to go to Los Angeles. It was quite a trip, because once in a while the train would stop and kick them off. All these young men were sitting on top of the train, and they were starving and thirsty and hungry, but they ended up in Los Angeles. And by chance, he was washing dishes and didn't speak any English. And sitting there, he saw a man reading a Danish newspaper. And that's how he got connected to the Danish community in Los Angeles. And he got him a job. My mom came over to visit her and stay with her aunt and uncle and a cousin in Pasadena. And right on Rosemead, when I saw the first mountain in my life, and there was Mount Wilson, and it seemed like the road went straight up in the air. I was just amazed at seeing a mountain, because Denmark is kind of flat. The highest mountain is like 1,000 feet.
Wow.
And we call it the Heavens Mountain.
Yeah.
It's about as tall as it got.
Oh.
And so they met and started to participate in the Danish community. And pretty soon they fell in love and got married.
Oh, wonderful. That's beautiful. Where did you grow up?
I started in Los Angeles. I was born in a maternity hospital in Venice, California. They were living someplace in West LA. Mm-hmm. And then when I was 4.5, my grandmother came from Denmark, and she talked my dad into that Denmark was much better. It was depression. It was just getting over it. It was in 1935. Mm-hmm. And she was trying to tell him that they were better off in Denmark. They had a nice home. They had beautiful furniture. We had a car. We go to Denmark. We had nothing. She was going to help us, but she gave us her old furniture while she got new furniture. And then she made my mother be her servant. They had a bakery, and she had my mom's work in the bakery and serve her and her sister-in-law coffee in the afternoon. And my mom was furious. That was not why she came to Denmark. And we ended up in a brand new apartment building. My dad was a welder, and he was an artist in ornamental iron in California. And, we have the Spanish influence. And so he did all of the gates up in the Los Angeles Library. And he did something for Nat King Cole. And
one of my favorites.
Yeah. He did some railings for him in his home. And Catherine Grayson was a soloist. She was a beautiful lady. And he comes to Denmark, but they don't need ornamental iron work because they're different types of buildings. Mm-hmm. And so there was nothing for him to do, and he was struggling. And so my mom's uncle had just built this big building we were moving into, and my dad was going to be the caretaker and keep the apartments warm, heat the water to get the heat. And he took care of the piece of property, and it was a big apartment complex. It was 2 big buildings and a nice garden. And so I was pretty privileged because most of them just were in the slums and in apartment buildings where there was no gardens or no nothing. Mm-hmm. But we did have a garden, and we had swing sets and sandbox, and I thought that was
all the fun stuff.
I was pretty lucky considering what the other kids had.
So tell me a little bit about your siblings.
I only have one sister. She's 20 months older than me. Her name is Jean Dorothy, and she married a Danish guy and became Rode, R-O-E-D. And they lived in Pacific Palisades and then in Solvang.
So they had good taste too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about your journey as a little girl. What was life like for you?
Well,
when did you leave? You mentioned the story.
I was 4.5. But when I came back and I was 17, we saw the Los Angeles City Hall, and I said to my mother, I've been there. And she said, yes, you went there when you were 4.5 years old. Imagine I couldn't recognize that building. You got your passport in that building. So I remember that.
Well, I would like to preface that this beautiful lady, look at her. She is 92 years young, and she is sharp as a whip. So to be able to recall all this information, I'm in awe of her. And we'll talk a little bit more about what she does for routinely, her diet, and which it's amazing. I mean, I just think she's just a marvelous soul. Tell me a little bit about what it was like for you as a child, where exactly you lived, because I know you lived here for a little bit, but then you had to go somewhere else. Can you tell us a little bit about that? How did that feel for you?
Well, they could not afford to pay their trip to Denmark. So my parents stayed behind, and my grandmother, my Danish grandmother, who didn't speak any English, we were sailing for 6 weeks with this Danish grandmother. I didn't understand a word she said. There was just a steward on board the ship. And we went through the Panama Canal up to Hull, England, and then over to Sweden. And there we took a train to Copenhagen. And there the family met us. And that was the first thing I knew, is that I had a big family. And we had a little apartment, but we lived with them until my parents came 9 months later. I could hardly wait. Yeah. By then, I was speaking Danish, and my sister was too. And my grandmother threatened us if we didn't speak English when my parents came, then they would go back. So I spoke English like crazy. But basically, I didn't want to speak English anymore. And my dad could make me speak English in my sleep. I would sleepwalk, and then he could talk to me in English, and I could talk in English, but I wouldn't do it when I was wide awake.
Yeah, I just think it's fascinating when you immerse a child at a young age to learn a second language. And I think that's so important.
It was funny how happened little by little. Like we had a cute uncle that's a wonderful uncle. He became very well known in Denmark. He developed chocolate factory.
Yeah.
And it's very well known in Denmark.
Uh-huh.
And he was just the greatest guy. He was engaged at the time. And so he said, we're going to go in the forest, but I didn't know what a forest was. He said, we're going to sko. And I went, what is that? So I was jumping along him. I remember, and I said, when are we going to be in this sko? And he says, this is it. And I looked, and I said, oh, you mean the forest?
Mm-hmm.
So now that's how I learned it little by little. But he also I was warned by my grandfather, do not go and look in this can on a shed.
Mm-hmm.
He must have told me why, because it had honey in it and there would be bees. And I didn't know what it was. And I was curious what could be in that can that was so important that I could not look into it. So I decided to climb up on a bicycle that was leaning up against the wall to see what it was, but it slid down and I scraped my nose. So he said, what happened to your nose? I said, oh, I had a sunburn. So I was kind of a little worried. He said, no, this is what was in the can. It was bees. Oh, this is bees. Then I got what a bee was.
Uh-huh.
Little by little is how we learned it. And my sister was very good because she had listened to my parents and my grandmother for 6 months speaking Danish. And she actually was pretty good. And by school starting in August, and that we came in April, they couldn't tell she wasn't Danish. That's how well she did.
So how old were you when you went?
4.5. And
Four
she
and a
was
half.
6.
They're fun
I
too.
was not bashful. My sister she was withdrawn. She was like kind of careful to get acquainted with people. And I was just a tomboy. Anyhow, then my parents came at Christmas on the Christmas ship. It was wonderful to see them again. So I lived in that new apartment building. Eventually, it took probably a year or two before we moved into it. And it was being built by my mom's uncle. He was well-to-do, a builder. In fact, there wasn't no stairs in yet, and we had to climb on a ladder to get into the apartment. But we had a modern apartment, modern heating. But during the war, we were not allowed to go in and use hot water. We had a bathtub. We couldn't use it.
It's so cold there.
The only thing we could use it for is to put water in there when there were strikes. We had a strike every once in a while, and then it said, save some water, buy food. You go and get potatoes, you go and get bread, you go and get this and that. And then we bunkered down. So in 1940, April the 9th, 1940, the Germans occupied Denmark. And it was quite a day. We woke up that morning with the loud noise of airplanes buzzing the rooftops. We jumped out of bed. It was like 5 a.m. and we looked out and we saw planes everywhere in the sky, just with one pilot in it. And they were throwing pamphlets down. It was like it was snow landing on the ground, and we ran out and got some. And I have one of those leaflets that they drop.
Oh, do you still have it?
I have it. Yeah. My mom saved it, and then she gave it to me when she passed away. My sister gave it to me.
What did it all say?
It said that we were very lucky to have the Germans occupy us because the Allies were thinking of doing the same thing. Had they done that, we would have been a battlefield, just like Holland and Belgium. We would have been attacked. So she said, you are lucky. Norway was not as lucky as we were because they resisted and we did not. And they hit their merchant marine, and all of them escaped and went to England. And the Germans were furious. Because they wanted their ships, and they were in all the fjords in Norway, and they were warned to leave just before they came up on April the 9th. And
I'm amazed how you still remember all of this. What were your sentiments at the time? Were you fearful? Did you have?
Well, it was scary. It was very scary.
Was it loud?
It was loud. It was so loud, and the planes were loud. And all during the war, the Allies would fly right over our rooftops between Sweden and Copenhagen, and then down to Germany to bomb in Poland and Russia and Germany. And it was loud. We had to go into our basement. There was no protection really only from shrapnel. And it was loud because
imagine
they used anti-aircraft. And it goes,
like machine gun.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, it was so loud. And then we had big glass doors leading into the stairwell. big, going all the way across, maybe 10 feet wide. So we were scared going by because it would look like fireworks. And shrapnel is what we were worried about.
And you were exactly what age at this point?
That was in 40. I was 10 years old.
Yeah, you're a baby still.
Yeah, I was just a little girl.
I can imagine.
So the German occupied us for 5 years. They treated us well. Can't say that but they also happened to have a barrack right at the end of our street. We were butting right into one of the main thoroughfares from Copenhagen up north along the coastline. So it was loud. And towards the end of the war, it was every night. Otherwise, it was a couple of times a week that they would bomb down in Germany. But towards the end of the war, they were doing it every night. And we would take our bikes, and we were perfectly safe to go in a youth hostel on trips, my sister and I. It was safe. And we would get down close to where we could see Germany way in the distance burning. It was just, you could see this skyline. I had a Jewish girl in my class. She came from Poland. Her father had a shoe factory. The Germans took him, and he was Jewish, so he disappeared. Her mother and her escaped to Copenhagen. And when they occupied Denmark, they went to the king first, King Christian X. And they told him that they were going to occupy us and that nothing would happen to him. They would protect him. But he was amazing, the king. He rode his horse every day alone in the streets of Copenhagen. He always had done that. And the Germans were amazed that he was safe doing that. The people loved him. They were amazed that he wasn't scared, that he was safe, that people protected him.
So you said earlier that the Germans treated you well.
Yeah.
Can you define what exactly is well? Because I mean, you're at war.
Well, the soldiers were up there just to relax a little bit from the war. The day they came to Copenhagen, it was at the end of our street. We ran up in the main street from Copenhagen, going up north to the north shore, our Riviera. They were housed up there, just a block away from us. That's where all the Danish soldiers were. And there was an Olympic swimming pool and a big park like Hyde Park, football fields, and all the exercises they did for the Olympic Games and stuff was right at the end of our street. We went there a lot.
So they didn't restrict you from doing these things. Nothing. So that's why you say that they were kind to you.
We're not allowed to stick our tongue out at them or say anything. We just were told to behave ourselves and just ignore them. And that's what we did. And they were big and I was small.
Yeah, you were a little petite little girl.
Gustavo,
yeah.
Big guy. So they were scared of me.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, I would be scared too with bombs running down above me. Yeah. As far as your education, you said that you did your fundamentals down there. And then at what age did you return back to the States?
I was turning 17 in July. We arrived in April.
So did your parents go pick you up?
Yeah, we all went together. So as soon as the war was over, was something else. It's called the Freedom Cry in Europe. The whole city of 1 million people suddenly start screaming. The war is over. The war is over. We're free. They tore off the dark curtains that we had to keep. When the Germans would be knocking on the door, if any light came out from our apartment. I mean, it was pitch black, especially when there was no stars. It was so dark you couldn't see your hand in front of you. So we had white ribbons around our arms.
Right.
So we didn't run into people because you couldn't see them. It's that dark.
Wow. I can only imagine the fear that would fall upon me. I know you had your grandmother to take care of you, but sometimes we long to have our mother just to, where's my mom?
And she was mean. She was a mean old lady.
You mean your grandmother?
Yeah, my grandmother was very mean. She took all of our toys away. My mother had us dolls and umbrellas and cute things. And she said, that's messy. I'm not going to have that. I mean, I can see that with our grandkids when they come. There's toys everywhere.
Yeah, it would probably stress her out, but I don't think that she meant anything really badly by it. It's just
she couldn't handle it. She was an old lady. She was taking care of us. We came in 34, 35, and it was 40. So there was no war for 5 years when I was living with my grandmother and my parents came over.
Yeah, it's tough to take care of children. Children sometimes put too many Barbie dolls out there for us.
I know, but we just adjusted to it. And my uncle came the one that became the rich guy with the candy store. He delivered to that royal family. He became well known. His chocolates are all over Denmark.
Do you have any still around, hidden somewhere, like with the package, or?
Well, he sends us some every Christmas. We get a nice package.
Oh, that's nice.
It's not as good as See's candy because they're
Oh, you
really
like
tiny.
See's?
They're really tiny, but it's good filling. But I like See's candy better.
I'm a Godiva gal. I like Godiva. So I wanted to, our careers has a tendency to consume so much of our lives. And many people have a hard time balancing that work-life balance. In retrospect, I thought we'd address a little about your education and work, a little bit about what you did, and I thought you
Okay.
could share it with us.
I graduated from high school. My sister stayed in the school that was just a block away. Hers was the last class that went from kindergarten to graduation. I was put in another school that I had to walk 20 minutes, snow, rain, no matter what. We didn't have a car. Nobody picked up kids. We just walked through it all. And so I had it much tougher than my sister did. And her friends became friends for life because they grew up together and they lived in the same neighborhood. Nobody lived in my neighborhood except one girl. So I didn't have that closeness that she did with her friends.
Mm-hmm.
So I was always jealous, and she would always take me with them, and they would play for birthday parties. They would dress up in costumes and play games. And
I think as a little girl, you really enjoyed playing games.
I
Because
did.
you talk a lot about wanting to play games.
My family was a fun family.
Uh-huh.
My dad was fun. He had a good sense of humor. And my mom, she was wonderful. Very
Lovely.
tiny little blonde thing, very cute. And we had only a 1-bedroom apartment. So we
You gotta
couldn't
make
have a lot
do.
of toys because there was no room for anything. We slept in the same bedroom. That's how I grew up. We didn't know any difference.
So tell me a little bit about your first job. Do you recall that specific job? What were you doing?
Yes, I graduated from high school. My sister got one year more than I did. I don't know why they did that to me, but that we were going to America. And so my dad says, you got to go out and earn some money. So I was short one class from high school, but it was a graduation, and you have an internship.
Paid internship? Did you get paid?
Yeah, that's how they do. Boys and girls. The boys can choose to quit when they are 14 if the parents can't afford to have them go further in education. And they could be bricklayers, they could be painters, but they were educated in a field. They had a trade, and they had to work at it 3 years. And you did it in an office. I did that and worked downtown, and I was supposed to be there 3 years. And then at night, we went to night school to learn more skills, bookkeeping, answering phones. So we were educated. But then we went to America, and I quit. And when I came to America, I worked hardware mutuals. It was a casualty and fire insurance. So that's what I did until I was married, and then I had my first baby, and I quit.
So let me ask you now, in hindsight, when just those two experiences, being race and the environment that you were in, that's pretty tumultuous, and your exposure to work, and you've had children, and we're going to dive into this a little bit, but what has been your definition of success?
Well, it was after I raised my kids, I went to work. I was at home, but I had 5 children, so I had no business working, basically. I was busy and got married when I was 20. My husband was almost 5 years older than me.
You like them old, huh? Okay. That's it. What is your proudest moment?
Well, eventually, when my kids were raised, we're going to pick my son up from the mission. He was in Buenos Aires. And my husband says, we're going to go down and pick him up, and then we're going to come straight back. And I said, no, we're not. I said, we're going to travel and see the different countries because the ticket is the same. We could stop. We could get the church to help us plan our trip. We're going to travel. So I went into an employment agency. Resolutely, I was going to do that. And then I came home and cried because I got a job the next day. I got all the jobs that I needed, and I hated every minute of it. I worked in some interesting places. JPL was one of them, and Bammel was really fun. That was the hula hoops and these flat dishes that you throw. They were flying through the air, and people were going hula hoops. Well, I finally ended up with General Electric, and both JPL and them wanted me to stay as a temporary employee, but just don't work for anybody else.
Yeah.
So they asked me if I could do that for the General Electric, and they were closer to me, where we lived in Arcadia, and it was only like 15 minutes to their office. So I thought, I can do that. So I said, well, can you work for 6 months? And I said, sure. And little did I know that job lasted for 20 years. What we did is what the government wanted us to write a book on how to operate the ships, how all of the different pieces of equipment on board the ship interacted with each other. They didn't know how to do that. Nobody knew what was going on. They were just clueless. And that was a job for 9 engineers to do.
Yeah.
They were jotting it down, and I couldn't hardly read their writing. They were terrible writers. And the English, I was better than they were in English and spelling. And so I did it for 20 years, and it
was a manual for them.
It was a manual for them.
Mhm.
So when I went to the San Diego temple, it was open house. There was a sailor standing next to me. And I said, oh, what ship are you on? He says, a destroyer. And I said, oh, do you know the PPM, the propulsion plant manuals? He said, do I know them? It's our Bible. That's how we operate the ship.
He was probably shocked, like you would even know about
No,
it.
I
It's
didn't
like,
know it was
how
that
do you know?
So that was really helped me to realize how important what I had done and stayed with it.
I could see that. Yeah.
And my husband, we had a gorgeous colonial home in Arcadia, and he decided to move to Lake Arrowhead. I could never figure him out why he did that, because I was working and making good money, and I was not about to give up this job because I knew I was doing something important for my country.
Mhm. But he had other plans.
No, because I did it. I stuck with it. I drove up and down that mountain.
Oh, wow. How long did you do that for?
20 years.
And that was,
It's
it's just,
12 years up there.
and you loved it. It's obvious you were passionate about what
I
you
was
were doing.
passionate about what I was doing because no one else could do it. I figured it all out, how to keep track of every ship, every page. So I knew exactly what to do when I have to look up something.
I love a woman with passion like that.
So
That stands firm
I
in
knew
her
that no
belief.
one else could do it, and they knew that I had to do it because they didn't know what I was doing, how I did it. Because then they said, and we did it the first time. It was not even a computer yet. It was Mac cards. It was before computers were out. I don't even know how I did that with the first manual. And then the Navy loved it and says, go ahead and print it out, make it into a book. I said, what? How do you make it into a book? He said, well, you're going to go to school. There like 2 or 3 days. And then I got a big Wang computer, and it was able to make it dual column and
Yeah.
jump everything.
Mhm, mhm.
So, I mean, that's what I did. And then it was a drafts person that took the ship and took every nut and bolt and showed it where it fit in and named them. And so everyone could know how to fix that ship.
Yeah, I love the passion that you had, your commitment, your devotion. You just traveled no matter what, up and down that hill.
Oh,
You
yes.
were determined. And I think that's beautiful. It shows your character, your
Well, I couldn't
integrity.
believe it. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, you
I
were-
knew it was important what I was doing, and we needed the money, and
So that's a proud moment for sure. Yeah.
that was one of my accomplishments. Is that I figured I did something for my country.
Yeah, very honorable.
If I may at this point ask to help my weekly content rise to the top, I would appreciate you subscribing and liking this video. Thank you.
So I'm going to shift a little bit to spiritual, which is obviously one of my absolute favorite topics. I know you're a lady of great faith, and today our youth particularly struggles, as you know, and are faced with great adversity. And I know that you have Paul, who was the oldest, who passed early, I believe in the age of 17 years old, due to...
He had osteosarcoma, that is bone cancer, and it's a kind that no one has ever survived it. He was given 1.5 years, maybe. He lived 2.5 years, but he was wonderful. He could have been angry, upset, mad. Most of the kids were. It hits kids from 11 to 21. And I met some of them, and my husband at the hospital met some of them, and they were mad that this happened to them. But my son was, every day is a good day.
He had a very special spirit to be like that.
And he was
Nobody's
happy, cheerful, like another day. Where are my friends? I want to go to seminary. He was an Eagle Scout.
Mm.
He water skied on one leg. He hated it because people looked at him. He was 6'2" when he died. He was a big kid. But every day was wonderful. When we came home from the hospital, when I found out, we were all crying. And he said, stop your crying and let's have family home evening. That was Monday night.
What a beautiful spirit. So you had Paul, then you had Ron, who's the next oldest.
Yeah. They were 20 months apart. And then Debbie came, and she was 20 months apart from Ron.
Interesting.
So I have 3 children in 3.5 years. And then I had 2 more daughters.
Oh, what a handsome guy. Look at that.
Isn't he cute?
Thank you.
Can you see how cheerful he is? He was when he was dying.
He's beautiful.
That's my sweet boy. What a jewel he was. He was a shining light to all of his friends.
Then you have
I had 3 girls. Debbie is in Anaheim Hills, and that's where I live. Teresa lives in Huntsville, Utah, and Janine is right here.
my friend.
And
So you had 3 girls and 2 boys. That's pretty impressive.
and they were so wonderful, all of them, very active in the church. We just did a lot of traveling. We were campers.
Stayed together as a family.
Oh, yeah.
Very
We
active.
camped and camped and camped. And with my sister's family, we camped. We went to Bass Lake. We did that for years.
Yeah,
Every
go
year.
back. Okay.
That's what's vacation. They still do it. We ended up going to Lake Powell instead of, after Paul died, we went to Lake Powell.
That's beautiful up there too.
Oh,
Very
yeah.
beautiful. It's just like
They have a
being in
houseboat. My Debbie has a fabulous houseboat.
Mhm. So I thought, you've had up to now, we talked a little bit about your experience as a little girl in the midst of a war. We talked about those things that inspire you. You're obviously a very passionate woman in your beliefs, spiritual as well. You've embarked what parenting is like. From your perspective today, what do you believe as a mother would help those who may potentially be watching this? What kind of advice would you give them to keep your family intact? A younger generation who maybe are contemplating children or perhaps are struggling with caring for their children or marital situation?
Well, we just had family night. This is with our church. On Monday nights, we always had family night and took over until we were in Relief Society, where the women meet. And we were told, let your husband give him roles to do. Don't you do everything for him. Let him run the family.
Did you hear that? Can you say that again? I couldn't hear you loud enough.
We were told to allow our husbands to lead the family, not us to put on the pants and do everything for them. Because it was easy for my husband when I did all, now we're going to do this, and I had it all arranged. And then I realized he needs to do that, not me, everything for family night. And so he started doing that, and we had so many fun games. He could sort of fun things for the kids. I let him take over, not always for the better as far as money and stuff, but I said, he was smarter. I would never have done what he did, but I allowed him to make decisions.
Tell me, what inspires you or guides you in life?
My faith in Jesus Christ. And I've actually been a gospel doctrine teacher twice. I've taught Relief Society. And when Paul was dying, I went to my stake president and I said, my son is dying. And I just became stake president. I was a counselor, but I said, now I'm over all the boys program. And I knew some of it, but I knew the girls really well. And I said, my son is dying and he comes first. Take him first. And he stopped for a moment. He said, the Lord wants you to serve. He will sustain you. And that's what he did. I can't do that. It's a big calling. We had 11 wards that I had to take care of, visiting all of these people and guiding them every month. I had big meetings. I can't do that, but I did it. And the Lord sustained me. Actually, I realized that he was pushing me and helped me. And it touched everybody's life in that stake because they realized what was happening to my son. And then President Munson became involved. He happened to be with my dearest friend, Jack McEwen. I met Jack and I didn't know I had met him. As soon as I came to America, I needed to get a molar and we had no money. And they said, you go to USC dental school and it's for free. I said, okay, I'll do that. And here was all these young dental students. And one of them was Jack McEwen, but I didn't know that. But he was talking about going dancing with his girlfriend. And I thought, dancing? Because I asked people, how do you meet young men in America? And in Denmark, you go to a studio and you go dancing. And they said, you go to church. I said, you gotta be kidding me. You go to church and meet young people? I thought Salvation Army. I had never gone to church in my life. I thought, no. Well, Jack McEwen became my best friend, and he was Bill called him to be serving in the temple, and ended up being temple president of LA Temple.
Isn't that something?
So it was 20 years later, he said, what about that tooth? And I said, and then he said, in 47, you're that little Danish girl that didn't want to speak English? I said, yeah. And he said, Jack, you didn't share the gospel with me. You should have been my missionary. And he said, yep.
I should have.
Then I met a young girl that I worked with for 3 years in the insurance business, Marie Bird. We were close friends. She gave me a shower. She went on a mission, didn't tell me about her mission. I knew she was LDS, but I didn't know what an LDS person was. And I thought, why didn't you share the gospel with me? So I said, yeah, I'm going to meet you someday in the temple. And I did. We were the last two people in the LA temple in the big room going through the veil. And I looked over and I said, Marie Bird? She said, yeah, Norma Van Dusen. She looked at me. Well, we couldn't talk. We had to go into the celestial room. And I said, Marie, you didn't share the gospel. And she said, I didn't think you would be interested. How do you know that? See, how many people are we going to meet that said you didn't share it because you thought, she won't do anything about it.
Still, you came around. Isn't it funny?
Yeah.
You've had many ups and downs, but how do you manage fear or worries? I know your perspective has drastically changed because of being a spiritual person. But, you know, it happens to even to those who attend church, for instance. I mean, how do you specifically, having seen this realm of incredible light?
Well, because I had taught for many years that gospel doctrine class. I loved
so you had an
that.
understanding.
Yeah, I had an understanding of the gospel, and I want the celestial kingdom. I just don't want plural marriage.
Yeah, that's not good.
But anyhow, I just have a deep faith in Christ, and he helped me. I knew that I didn't do it on my own. When Paul had died and I was now on my own, I was still primary president, and I felt dropped on my head. I realized I had been sustained every minute, but when he was gone, I was doing it on my own, and it was tough. Now I was mourning over my son. Before, I was struggling to be strong for him and for my children and my husband, because he was brokenhearted. President Monson was so sweet. What a guy. What a wonderful man. He came with Jack. Jack gave him a blessing the day he came out from the doctor's office with the told him he was going to die, and gave him a blessing saying, rebuked it. And then he told President Elder Monson then, how come? I felt so strong to say that, and it didn't happen. And he says, it really bothers me. He says, I don't know, but I'm going to see that boy. Now, he had a son the same age, and I found out that 3 years later, his son had the same thing and had a tumor on his leg, and they thought it was cancer. So President Lee gave him a blessing, and so did himself, President Monson. And it was not this cancer call that it always had to be. Right. And since we didn't think it had to be, but it was. And so he's kind of stuck with me and Bill. We wrote letters back and forth, and he wrote about Paul, constantly encouraging him, which was so sweet of him. He took time to bless us and gave us blessings. And then when he was dying, he had not very many weeks left. He said, his secretary called and said, President Monson wants to come and give Paul the blessing before he dies.
So I wanted to ask you about your hobbies. I would like to think we all have some form of outlet. Do you have any hobbies that you do that just have a tendency to light you up?
But we love to dance, my husband and I.
I knew I like a girl that likes to dance.
Actually, in Denmark, I competed and came in number 2 and 3 for the youth master in ballroom dancing. I took that as that was my hobby when I was growing up, from the time I was 14. But my parents didn't understand my passion for dancing, ballroom dancing. You can go practice once a week. Everybody else did it twice a week, or maybe 3 times. I couldn't compete entirely. I needed a fancy dress that had a big swing. Nope, then you can't go. So I struggled with my parents. They never saw me dance.
Oh no, that was your life. You enjoyed it.
And it was a passion of mine. And I was very lonely because they were not interested in anything that I did with the dancing. And they didn't realize I came in. Second, because I couldn't get a dress that could swing. I had my straight dress on from my confirmation. That was as good as my mom could do it. She put a little skirt on it that lifted a little bit, but not much.
You just like all that foo-foo on. So what is your favorite dance style?
Oh, I like foxtrot.
You like the foxtrot? Okay.
Yeah, foxtrot. Fast.
Yeah.
Quick step, they called it.
And you don't have any recordings of you dancing?
No, I don't. I have a picture of us. It was about it. And his parents were the studio people. They took me all over Copenhagen to the fanciest restaurants where we had competition. But my parents would not say that could go more. You're only 15 years old. You're not going to go more than once a week. That's enough. It's not enough.
They were just trying to protect you. That's all it was.
I know.
So what do you like to do for fun?
Genealogy.
You love genealogy.
I got 20,000 names almost. Maybe another 100 to go. My husband's lines are fabulous. He's as royal as the King of England because he has the same lines.
Wow. So how frequently do you do genealogy?
Every day.
Do you really?
Yeah.
It's addicting, isn't it?
Well, because there's so much to it that I keep finding more. I keep finding names. He's related to emperors of Rome, Marcus Aurelius, on and on, Constantine the First. All of these famous people, all of the Vikings that are fabulous Vikings. That's my bill. Ukraine. What happened to Ukraine? I know that it's his family that's established Ukraine. Russia wasn't even existing at that time. And his children became dukes of Novgorod and Kiev, and Russia didn't exist. I looked that on the internet. They said there was tribes coming and going, but it wasn't organized. But he organized it in Kiev.
Fascinating. Yeah, there's something really special.
So I get history. See, I read about the kings because people put a lot of information in there. So you say, man, how interesting. Of course, I forget, but that I did not forget. But see, my Danish line is very little because you can't go back further than 1600 because that's when the church records stop.
So that's it.
That's it for me. That's for me. For him, oh my goodness. He's a Mayflower, and the Van Duzens, they settled in New York. Well, the first 300 that settled Amsterdam, New Amsterdam, which is New York. And he was a miller. And
it's pretty amazing.
And then the Indians were attacking them. There was about only 300 there at that time. And so they built a wooden wall to protect their property. He had houses on Broadway. And many years later, they tore down that wall and it became Wall Street. How is that? We can go to Broadway and Wall Street, and that's exactly where his homes were. Isn't that interesting? I know the lines go way back, and every wife has a line that goes back, and then they have a line going back. Right. So I finally figured out that you stay with the main line, and then you write down who the wife is, her number, so I can find her again. And then I go her line, and then she has more lines. And so I write them down on a little card. So I have all these little cards that I have to do all of those lines, keep going back.
It's a lot of work. Yeah.
That's a lot of work. I think I'm almost done. I said, no, I've got a whole card more now. And so every time you do it, you're going to have more people, more and more people. But I figured that one out finally, that I could do it that way. So I can go on forever.
So let's go back to our hobbies, what we like to do. And you said you like to dance. So I
Dance, yes.
I relate to you 110%. What's your favorite music genre?
I love all kinds of music.
But is there one specifically that you just love?
Lawrence Welk.
You like
We
Lawrence?
like Lawrence Welk. We went dancing, Bill and I, at Lawrence Welk.
It's beautiful. Now, we know that times have passed. To be politically correct is an understatement these days. Everybody's views are scarce, and I can't resist but ask, considering everything that you've been through and what you have seen, what are your political views about the world today?
Well, I always hold on to the gospel and let that guide me. Well, they don't put Christ ahead in their lives because he tells you what to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I say he's right and they're wrong.
So out of all, history, your journey, do you have any one particular president that you admire or that
Ronald Reagan. He was my president.
I love his and Nancy's, their love story is magnificent.
Beautiful.
All the letters, I went to their museum up north.
Yes.
And it's just beautiful.
Yeah, it's lovely. And I had a boyfriend at that time. He looked like Ronald Reagan. He was much older than me. He was not my boyfriend. He liked me. He told me when told him I was going to America. He was probably 14 years older than me. I was just 17.
You're a baby. Uh-huh.
But
you like him older, right?
I liked him.
Yeah.
And when I told him that I was going to go to America, and he said, I was going to tell you I'm going to go to Paris. And he was a machinist, and I was going to get more education. And I'm coming back and wait for you to grow up a little bit, and I was going to marry you. So he comes to the train station when we're leaving, and he gives me a great big kiss, and he's crying, saying goodbye. My dad said, what was that for? I said, he loves me.
Oh,
so I like Ronald
Reagan.
Reagan.
Did you ever? Yeah, he's great.
Yeah. I always loved him.
He knew how to navigate. He
knew just how to reach your heart.
I just had to ask you that just because I have favorites too. I've been very fortunate to have stumbled upon a few presidents, face to face. But so I want to talk a little bit about your love life.
My love life?
And your sweetheart.
My sweetheart.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about the love of your life, who you decided to marry. I know earlier you tapped into it, but.
Well, I met Bill right away after I came to America. I said, how do you meet young people? And they say, you go to church. I said, what? Salvation Army? Marching through the streets? You're going to be kidding me. So they talked us into it, since we had never gone to church as I grew up. No, never. And we didn't pray. Basically, no blessing on food. We said a little night prayer, and that was it. I met Bill going to camping over 4th of July, probably 47. I was 17. Some Danish girls were going up to that little lake out of Azusa, and there was Bill standing. He was president of the Luther League of the Danish church. He was not a Dane, but he had a friend that was Danish, and it was his best friend, and their family was like his family. He was orphaned when he was 5. So he had a tough life, and he was just a great guy. He was a refrigeration. He had a shop. Didn't have an education because he was raised by a half brother who was 19. He ended up having 3 kids, a brand new baby that the mother never got out of the hospital. And here he was stuck with these 3 kids.
Yeah, that's tough.
So that was a tough time. So my husband, we clicked immediately. So when I saw him, I thought he was the skinniest guy I had ever seen in my life.
How tall was he?
Oh, he was taller than me. Not a whole lot more. He was about 5'10" and a half, and I was 5'7". Now I'm 5'2". But anyhow, he was just the nicest man you ever met. Everybody loved Bill, and he was a good leader. And so we fell in love very quickly. He started dancing with me at the camp, and by the time we drove home, I was sitting next to him. I don't know how I did it.
And you got goo-goo-eyed before you knew it?
Yeah, and then he took us ice skating and picked us, all the girls up. He was very good at dancing with all the girls at the campfires, which is one thing I noticed about him. He was kind and thought of girls that didn't have anybody that really wanted to dance with him. And he saw to everyone got danced, thoughtful of other people. He's a very kind person.
And so today, how many grandchildren do you and him share?
We have 16 grandchildren. But we have 32 great-grandchildren and more coming.
That is amazing.
Boys are winning, not by much.
So, what advice do you have to offer the younger generation today?
We have our Danish traditions. Christmas, we dance around a Christmas tree. Don't take that away from any of us. They all love to dance around a tree.
And what advice would you have to offer about love?
Be faithful. Don't have a roving eye. Faithful to your husband and a husband to the wife. Trust each other.
How should they manage conflict when it comes or presents itself?
Well, I would say that he took over and did what he thought was right. And most of the time I was right and he was wrong.
And how do you forgive in a relationship such as, the one that you and him shared?
We got along really well. We never argued.
Never argued.
No, he would not argue, period.
Okay.
But he kind of did what he thought we should do.
Had a mind of his
But
own.
I didn't always agree with him, and I told him why I didn't agree. And most of the time I was right. If he had not done what he did, like selling that home, it's now $2 million. But that's water under the bridge.
So we have many disappointments in our lives, in particular in relationships. We have children. You experienced probably one of the worst, having to lose a child.
That was really hard on my husband.
And those types of experience oftentimes have a way of stopping us on our tracks.
Well, it either breaks you or makes you.
Exactly. So I think about overcoming that. I know a lot of families that have lost their babies, their infants, or even had someone accidentally run their child when they were in the backyard. There's just been stories after stories that I've been really, it just breaks my heart. So, life is a lot about disappointments, but I think it's oftentimes how we overcome those disappointments, how we handle it more with an optimistic eye. How do you manage at the times? I mean, you obviously went through it, but
I was mourning even after he passed away. I was grieving because now he was gone, but I was still grieving that I lost him. But I understood it. I didn't blame God. Why did you do that to us? He did not do that to us. This is life. No one says that you're going to have it easy. I have a little plaque that says, I didn't say it would be easy. I only said it would be worth it.
Who has been the most kindest person in your life to you? That automatically, when I say that, who's been the kindest?
My husband, kindest person you would ever meet. Never judged anybody. Never talked about anyone. Even though our son was kind of nasty at times, he never said a word about his son.
Has your life been different than what you had imagined?
Yeah.
It was different than you had imagined.
Yes.
Yeah, I think we all do.
I mean, we would like everything to go easy, but you got to face the troubles when you have them.
So who are the most important people in your life today?
I would say my children. My grandchildren, I can't control them. But my kids, I had them I taught them. We both taught them well, the gospel. And we had fabulous people in our state that taught our children.
The support,
very grateful for that.
It takes a community.
Yeah.
It really does. So how would you like to be remembered? Because you've left a fabulous legacy in my opinion.
Well, it's my Danish legacy, basically, that the kids like, the traditions. And my mom kept them up too. And they love that. And my sister kept it up. And so my cousins, my children's cousins, we all know what it means to have a Danish Christmas. That's important to us.
Right. So would you say that the greatest impact of your life, or the one source of influence in your life, is the culture that
I grew up in? I think so.
Yeah, it's interesting. We take it for granted as little kids.
Yeah.
But then we learn to savor all aspects of
They wanted their Danish Christmas, dancing around that tree. And Paul was dying. The next day he said, I got to go to the hospital. I can't breathe. But he sang Silent Night and we were all crying because we knew it was the end for him, his last time. And that touched all of my nieces and nephews. They remember that night. That was it.
So going back to reflecting our lives, what do you value most today in your life?
Yeah, my children and my grandchildren. They're all okay.
So one last question before we wrap up here. If you could live anywhere in the world, and you live in a beautiful state. You essentially have lived here all your life, with the exception of when you were a child and exposed to different environments. Where would you want to live?
Well, we love Hawaii. Had a timeshare there, but my sister had another week, so we had 2 weeks out with fabulous timeshare on Hawaii.
Those people, the culture, they're beautiful, aren't they?
Just love it. We did that for years and years. As long as they lived, and we lived.
Well, I so appreciate you taking the time to do this. I admire you. I admire your family. I admire your strength, your spiritual strength, your conviction. You remind me a little bit of me in a lot of different ways. You know, we're kind of strong, but that's all good. You know, we're passionate, and we have a strong conviction. And
I think having troubles helps strengthening you. You realize that you have the strength to do it.
I would
never
have to say
thought
that.
I could do what I did, that I could be state primary president and have a son dying. And I had 3 other young children.
It's almost like it lifts you spiritually, your wisdom. You just get so keen when you're at that level, particularly when you're serving.
Yes.
Yeah,
The Lord
they're
just blessed me. And I knew it was true. I knew where Paul was going. It was a wonderful place. Why would I have him suffer? The kids were wonderful. They understood it. Nobody was angry with God. None of his friends were angry with God, but they were so sad that he was dying. It was really hard on some big.
It's like, why them? You know, why is it happening to them? Everybody thinks out.
Yeah.
But when you do have the gospel, it has a way of toning down those fears, because your perspective is just, it's so different than the traditional ways that people think.
Yeah.
You have a clearer perspective on eternal perspective. So,
I'm just grateful that I could do it.
Yeah,
You
well,
don't know whether you could or not, really.
until you lean into it. So thank you so much. I appreciate it. I think you're fascinating. I do. I think she's fascinating. And I'd love to have her be dancing with her.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
So, I am curious to know what impressions did this video leave in you? Are you walking away with any new insights? Did you at least enjoy it? Again, to help my content rise to the top, please be certain to subscribe and like for all content related to relationships in love and war. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Do you hear that music? It has only gotten louder. It's like, come on. I want to see that beautiful face.
All of it, princess, not princess.
I mean, we grow up. We grow up.